I was young, grade school young. Nobody at the time was home. The house was to myself, which was common practice at the time. It all started when I went to use the bathroom. I'm the type that takes a long time in the bathroom. It's always been my calm, meditative time. To my surprise, this would be anything but calm. I was just sitting down on the toilet, reading a magazine. The bathroom I was in was really small. If you walked in, the sink would be immediately on your left, toilet right in front of you, and the shower on your right. So as I was saying, I was on the toilet with the door about a foot and a half in front of me. As I was doing my thing, reading my magazine, I suddenly heard and saw the bathroom door pound. I remember how terrifyingly loud it was. The pound was as hard as if someone was trying to kick down the door, or punched it with an insane amount of force. I remember seeing the handle and its screws barely holding onto the latch. It was terrifying. Confused and scared, I didn't make a move. I didn't know what to do. I was completely frozen in shock. I remember feeling so scared and vulnerable, trying to listen if I could hear anyone on the other side. I knew I was home alone, but thought maybe someone came home even though I didn't hear anyone come in the house. After so many minutes of silence that felt like eternity, I questioned what exactly I should do. I didn't hear anything or anyone. I just wanted to get out of the bathroom and the house, at least until someone was home. But also I was scared in case a burglar was in the house. I eventually built up the courage to open the door and run out. I opened the door and literally ran to the other side of the house and noticed no one was home and it was eerily quiet. I quickly got on my bike and left the house. I decided to stay out until my mom or someone else came home. I never told anyone in my family about what happened, and nothing was missing in the house, so I figured no reason to sound crazy. They wouldn't believe me either way. I know what I heard and saw. It was some of the most gut-wrenching terror I have experienced. The hairs on my body still rise just thinking about it. Sadly, this was only the first of many strange and scary experiences I would have in that house. When I was about 11 or 12, my two friends and I had the great idea of playing with a Ouija board. The rest of the night was a mess. Before I explain what happened, here's a little backstory on the board we used. The board belonged to the sister, Dee, of one of the friends involved in this story. While she and a friend were using it, the board was put away without saying goodbye first. Whatever was talking to them that day freaked Dee's friend out enough to pretty much throw the board back in the box and close it up. I did some reading, and apparently ending a Ouija conversation without saying goodbye can result in something either latching onto you or the board itself. We were stupid enough to use the same board. My friend Erie was invited to spend the night at my house. Being the little badasses that we thought we were, we decided we'd play with the Ouija board. Our friend Ryan lived across the street from me, so we called him to join us. We started playing and asked if there was anyone with us, if they wanted to tell us their name. The placket spelled out Andree. Okay, cool, my middle name. At this point, I was sure that Erie was messing with me. And then it spelled out YOUMUSTRUN. Just remembering and writing that gave me the chills. So obviously, we're pretty much done with talking to spirits and say goodbye. We dipped the hell out and decided to go across the street back to Ryan's. At the time, the property behind his house was vacant and a small chain link fence was the only thing keeping us from exploring, so we did. Erie's always had great intuition, and when she says we need to go, it's time to go. She started to feel uneasy being in the vacant backyard and returned to the other side of the fence. I followed. There was a growing tension in that yard. Suddenly, we both get a feeling that something bad is going to happen. We start yelling for Ryan to come back over, but he thought we were freaking out over nothing. We finally convinced him to come back and started helping him over the fence to speed things up. We were chunky kids. Erie and I each had a grip on either of his arms when we suddenly felt a lot of resistance. Ryan's hood was being pulled back by something unseen, and he was audibly gasping for air. I don't know if one of us reached to grab his hood while the other pulled him over, but we managed to get him back onto his property. Then he was finally breathing again. He was disturbed and just wanted to go back in his house for the night. Erie and I parted ways with him and went back to my house for our sleepover. We talked about what had happened, but since we were kids, the situation was now funny and cool. It wasn't. Due to my past issues with sharing a bed with someone, I slept on the floor and gave her my bed. When I woke up in the morning, I had 3 long scratches on both sides of my pelvis and waist. I had slept alone. Erie couldn't have done it. It looked like deep cat scratches, but my cat was declawed, not my choice. And I never scratched myself like that. It never happened again, but it's something I still think about to this day. The incident occurred when I was around 3 years old. As with being that young, I don't remember much from that time, except for one vivid memory. My family had not long ago moved into a rental property in the suburbs of Melbourne. It was a nice enough house, small but cozy, perfect for a young family. It began on a day during winter when darkness came early, wherein I was sitting on the couch in the living room watching a kids show that I can't remember. I was kinda zoning out when the eerie feeling of being watched flowed over me. A tingle at the back of my neck that made me stiffen and look around in confusion. Everything was normal. I heard my parents cooking dinner in the kitchen and my older sister was playing on the ground nearby. I physically felt eyes boring into the back of my head, so following my instincts, I turned and looked out the window. The first thing I noticed was that the curtains were opened, even though it was pitch black outside and Mom always closed them when the sun went down. Focusing on what's beyond the glass, my eyes searched the whole darkened front yard. A shiver ran down my spine because somehow I knew there was something out there. I froze, and fear shot through my very core when the blackness moved and I saw a shape amid the shadows. There was a tall, dark figure lurking under the large tree that stood in the middle of the lawn. This thing looked humanoid, but I couldn't see any detail. It was just jet black, like my eyes couldn't quite focus on it when I looked right at it. I couldn't see its face, but I somehow knew it was looking right at me. I had the feeling that whatever this was, it didn't have good intentions. All I remember is thinking bad when I saw it. What was even stranger was that the pale glow from the street lights left the yard in shadow, but the dark figure cast no shadow. It felt like forever, but was probably only a few minutes that I stood terrified at this thing. My heart was thundering in my chest. I felt like a predator being stalked by its prey. Mercifully, my mom's voice broke through the panic as she called us to dinner. Snapping my eyes away from the shadow, I glanced over my shoulder to where my mom was setting the plates on the table. I sighed in relief at the normalcy. I didn't want to look back, but I just had to know if it was still there. So plucking up my courage, I turned back to the window. My eyes widened in shock though when I saw that the figure was gone, like it was never there. When I saw that it was gone, I did what any 3-year-old would do. Shrug it off and go eat dinner. I honestly thought this was a dream until I was chatting with my mom and asked her if there used to be a tree in the front yard of our old house and a gray chair in the lounge room. When she told me there was, I was freaked out and told her what I remembered. There were too many similarities to the house, and it's weird that I would remember so much about that incident from being that young, so I figured it had to be a memory. I realized quickly on that my house was indeed haunted. The constant banging or shadow figures that I would come to see would just cement that for me. One of the earlier experiences I witnessed would change my innocence in that house forever. One night, before going to sleep, I was playing video games in my room, and I remember feeling really cold. It was winter at the time, and it felt as if the window was open. I remember getting up to check to see if the window was indeed open. To my surprise, it was not. Still, I didn't put any thought into that. I thought maybe it was an air leak around the window or something. Either way, I wasn't going to wake anyone up for that. So after feeling cold and tired, I decided to just call it a night and go to bed. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, quickly and completely puzzled. I was puzzled because my body felt something physical. That's what woke me up. Before I could even wrap my mind on anything, I felt it again on my chest. I looked down. It was dark, but I could still see. Once I saw what it was, I just thought, what the hell? It was my hat, and there were a couple of my hats on the bed and the floor. Then it happened again. This time I seen it with my own eyes. My hats were flying off my hat rack on the bedroom door and hitting me. I immediately freaked out and screamed. I ran to my parents' bedroom and woke them up. I told them what had happened. At first they didn't believe me. Then they saw the hats everywhere in my room. They were confused and I'm sure scared themselves. I slept with them the next couple of nights. Around this time last year, I was lying in my bed at like 3 a.m. I was on my phone texting someone and didn't know how to spell a long word that started with the letter P. I can't remember the word, but for story's sake, let's say it was pretty. I say the word into the microphone, but it doesn't register, so I say it again. This time it registers. But a second later, I hear the word pretty come from under my bed in a demonic voice, as if it was mocking me. Petrified of the sound I've just heard, I froze and didn't move for at least a minute. I finally texted my boyfriend at the time. He happened to be awake and I gave him a call. I put the phone under the bed while on FaceTime with him. He says he saw nothing, so I ended up staying on the phone with him all night. I was too scared to sleep. The next morning, I tell my mom, and she says it's my phone messing up. She's just saying that so I don't get scared. But really, I know there was something under there. It was 2003. I was 7 at the time, my sister was 10, and my brother was 5. My parents were heavily involved with the Christian church, as my father had just begun pastoring. They would leave my sister in charge of us at home occasionally when they didn't feel like taking us to meeting after meetings. On this particular day, my brother was spending time at my grandparents' house, so it was just my sister and I at home. We were excited to have the TV to ourselves, so we got snacks ready, sat on the floor, and put on a movie. During this time, I remember feeling like something was watching us. As we were watching the movie, I had a strong urge to turn around. Both my sister and I, without communicating, turned around at the same time. What we saw behind us was my brother laying on the couch. He then proceeded to smile. However, his smile soon became eerie and unnatural, his teeth turning sharp and the ends of his smile reaching his eyes. He literally resembled the Cheshire Cat from Alice in Wonderland. I turned back around to process what I had just seen. At first I was just really confused and alarmed, but then I remembered my brother wasn't home, and terror hit me. I looked at my sister, who was staring at me with utter fear in her eyes. I asked if she saw what I did, and she nodded yes. It took all the courage and strength I had to get up and run to our parents' room. We hid there until my parents came back and never mentioned it to them. I'll never forget that smile. I've had many experiences since then, but this one, by far, is still the creepiest. This took place when I was about 4 or 5 years old. at my childhood friend's house. My friend is a little older than I am, and she would have been around 6 or 7 years old at the time. We were playing all afternoon, giggling and not doing our homework that her mom had been asking us to do for hours. Her mom was finally fed up with all of our procrastinating and asked us to go in separate rooms in the house so we could do our homework. She asked her daughter to work in her room and had me work in the dining room, which was adjacent to her daughter's bedroom. My friend's mother told us she was going to do laundry in the back of the house, so she left us, and my friend and I quietly did our homework in our separate rooms. It wasn't too long after that I had a weird feeling. It was so strange, but for some reason I just felt kind of stunned. I heard footsteps coming up the front porch of the house, and then I heard the footsteps reach the front door. Then the door slowly creaked open, and the steps got closer. They reached the living room, which was directly in front of me. My head was down as I was sitting at the dining room table, as I was too scared to lift it up. Then the footsteps got closer to me and walked directly to my right side. My head was still looking to the floor as I was still in shock, and I saw by my feet were 2 black loafers worn by a man wearing gray slacks. In that instant, while I was trying to gather myself and comprehend what was happening, my friend swung open her bedroom door, which was on my right-hand side, and she yelled, "Did you hear that?" I said yes, and told her what I heard and saw. We ran to her mom to tell her that someone was in the house and what just happened. Needless to say, her mom freaked out, ran all over the house, room to room, to make sure no one was in there. No one was home besides us. I later found out that my friend's grandfather passed away in that house, and every so often they would hear the footsteps walking up the porch and into the house. So I'm going to share my story. Honestly, even just talking about it makes me uncomfortable, as I feel like I'm summoning it. Background info. I've had sleep paralysis since I was a child. Look up what that entails. Usually it's shadowy figures with a very heavy presence. It sucks. I was 10, just moved to the US, so all we could afford was this very small house directly across from a cemetery. This probably had nothing to do with it, but it certainly didn't help calm my 10-year-old self. My grandma always gifted me these porcelain dolls. You know the ones. They need a stand to hold them straight, and they are creepy looking with glassy eyes. I had a shelf in my room which was in the basement where I kept this doll collection. They always creeped me out, but since they were gifts, I kept them. One time my grandma brought me this extremely creepy doll. All the other dolls had some coloring in their faces, blush cheeks, and etc. This one didn't. She wore a deep red velvety dress, had extremely pale skin, and glossy, dead-looking blue eyes, with straight blonde hair and bangs that were a little too short. She freaked me out. Soon after, I started having extreme sleep paralysis. Prior to this, my experiences were tame and just involved seeing a shadowy figure. Now I started hearing loud manic laughter mocking me, telling me that my family couldn't hear me and I couldn't yell for help. Coming from a religious country, I immediately started praying loudly in my mind and yelling in my head that I believed in God. Now, I'm not really that religious. I don't go to church, but I did go to Catholic school for a few years. In this situation, this is all I could think of to scream. This kept reoccurring multiple times a week to the point I learned to sleep with my television on, and sometimes all the lights on, because that would allow me to know the passage of time during the paralysis, whether I was awake or not. The more I write, the more I'm realizing how absolutely insane all this sounds. I swear this is 100% true. I would tell my mom, and thankfully she would empathize with me and let me sleep in her bed, even though I was between 10 and 12 during this time. The climax was one day, during the daylight after school, I went downstairs and the feeling of dread that usually came right before I had sleep paralysis came over me. Except this time, I was fully awake and it was daylight. I went downstairs and heard laughter and laughter. It's important that I mention, every time I had sleep paralysis, it was this effing doll that I would see reveal itself to me during the ordeal. I went to my room to find a sticker of an angel ripped in half. It was previously pasted to my bed frame. I ran upstairs. From there, I couldn't go to the basement alone. I had to either ask my brother to come with me or someone else. We moved my bed upstairs and I shared a room with my mom. Thankfully, after a few years, we moved to a better house a few blocks away. My aunt was helping us move. She has a really good intuition. She dreams about people's pregnancies and whatnot. So we never really mentioned what I went through with her. It was something we kept in-house. She stayed behind doing general cleaning while everyone was at the new house unpacking. When my mom came back to pick up more stuff, my aunt asked her if she had felt or seen anything in the house. My mom asked why, and my aunt casually said, "Oh, I asked because when I was cleaning alone, I saw a small child going around the house." My mom was taken back, as obviously she knew what I had been claiming, and I even told her I felt it was a young person. That doll did not come with us to the next house. I do still have occasional sleep paralysis, but since I've had them so much, I know all the warning signs and can usually get myself out of it. The laughter never came again, though. This is the tale of when I met death and lived. This story takes place when I was 12 years old. At the time, I was living primarily with my mom, and I was a bubbly, energetic kid who literally would never stop talking. Halfway through the school year, I caught a case of what my mom thought was the flu. I stayed home from school and days passed, but I got worse. My fever spiked to 104.5. I started to lose my eyesight and hearing, and I had a splitting headache that made me so nauseous I couldn't eat. I spent a month in and out of the hospital, and the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong with me as I got sicker. I thought I was going to die, and my mom had the same fear. Towards the end of that month, I was out of the hospital for a bit, and my mom was caring for me at home while I slept almost the whole day, not moving. One afternoon, I woke up from a nap to see a figure standing in my doorway. He was as tall as the door and wore a long brown trench coat with a brimmed hat. When I looked closer to make out his facial features, I realized he didn't have any. He was just a shadow. I knew instantly that I was looking at death, the one who was going to take my spirit away. But I felt absolutely no fear. As I stared at him, he inclined his head towards the hallway and beckoned me, as if to say, "Come with me." I silently shook my head and thought, no, not yet. He tipped his hat to me and then disappeared from my doorway. Since that vision, I think about death almost every day. I'm highly sensitive and always looking for meaning in my life. I've written poems and stories about it over the years, but usually just laugh it off to others as a hallucination. I'm certain that seeing my Hat Man changed me deeply. I guess he recognized the strength in my spirit, or my resolve, and gave me more time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed my tale. This happened to me when I was 16 years old. Back in those days, I used to stay up late at night on the computer or watching TV. But I remember it was somewhere between 2 or 3 a.m. that I was downloading some music on my phone when I started to hear dogs bark from far away. I didn't pay too much attention to it because sometimes cats were jumping from one house to another. But suddenly the barks started happening at the houses near me. The dogs seemed to be very altered for what was happening out there, and things got weirder when out of nowhere the dogs went completely silent. That's when I started to feel that something wasn't right, and I decided to stand up and watch through my window in order to find the reason for whatever was messing with the dogs. As soon as I looked through the window, I raised the view to the sky and saw this woman figure moving from left to right slowly in front of me, approximately 10 to 12 feet away from my window. I noticed it had a white tunic that covered her whole body except her hands. She had her arms extended to the sides and had long black hair that covered her face. I stood there watching her move slowly to the right. The encounter probably lasted 7 seconds until I lost sight of her. I was completely in shock at what I was seeing that I didn't try to do anything else at the moment, but when I stopped looking at it, my first reaction was to close the curtains and sit on my bed. The barks from the dog started to sound again, and I assume it was because of that thing. I couldn't sleep because I was still trying to figure out if what I saw was real. A day after, I got the news that one of my old neighbors passed away that night. I don't know if that was connected somehow with what I saw, but until this day, no one believes me about what happened to me that night. It was 10 years ago, and I'm still thinking about it. So I've never really told anyone outside of family and friends about this, but when I was younger, we lived in this house in San Antonio, Texas. I've had multiple encounters there, and this is the first of a few. So me and my younger brother shared a room in the back of the house. It was a fairly small room with 3 windows and a small closet. In that room, the door would close on its own. Stuff would randomly fall, the usual. I passed it off as just, whatever. Until one night, I woke up, I want to say around 2 or 3 in the morning. I don't know what woke me up, but I glanced at the end of mine and my brother's beds. They were twin beds, and they were about 2 feet apart. I saw this dark figure, almost the size of my brother, just standing there at the end of my brother's bed. I was still half asleep, and it was dark, so I just said, "Dude, go to sleep, what are you doing?" The figure stood there for about another 3 seconds. Then it seemed like it squatted down to hide from sight. I turned and looked at my brother's side where he was laying dead asleep. I got chills all over my body and went under my blanket for the night till I fell asleep. Never saw that same figure again. My brother tells me that he saw a dark figure outside the window wearing a top hat, but I never saw that one. But I believe him. That house definitely had something. I used to live in a haunted place. My name is Zach, and I don't believe in ghosts, but my experience in this place still remains in my head, and I just can't explain what I've seen, felt, or heard. When my mother was with her ex-boyfriend, he bought a house and we moved in. It was a yellow house built in 1970 in Saint-Martin countryside, but not that far from Paris. The last owners were probably an old couple. I never knew, probably because I never asked. This was in 2011. I spent 3 years living there before my stepfather and mom broke up, and I left for my student life. Among the strange events that occurred, I remember the reverse cross on the ceiling in the garage. Every time we fixed the cross due to humidity, the shape always came back to the same place. My cat used to freak out right under the cross and yelled like he was in pain. I assumed it was pure coincidence. One night, my family wasn't there and a friend of mine slept over. I had to grab something in my mother's bedroom and felt observed. My mom used to say she hated her bedroom because she confessed how she woke up sometimes thinking there was somebody next to her, not my stepfather. When I came back in my room, my friend was scared as hell. Her face was blank and she told me she saw something by the window. My theory was it was a bird, probably an owl. Anyway, the creepy feeling was mutual. One of the craziest episodes was at a party. We were talking with 2 friends near some mirrors and a Buddha statue. Everyone was calm, there was no drugs or anything like that. Then all the mirrors fell and sliced the head off the statue. The rest of the body was still standing. Everyone was shocked and asked us what just happened. Maybe it was a temperature problem, but it was just a regular April night and I don't remember any weird weather issues. And there's this story about the freaking TV. We changed our TV over and over again. The screen used to activate itself and change channels even when we were watching something. Some technicians explained it as something they could not fix easily since the system was a bit old. Did I mention the mirrors in the bedroom? I know, right? It's so cliche. I never seen ghosts in the mirrors, but it was always dirty. Even if we cleaned it daily, it reminds me of the cross stuff. Anyway, I live in my own flat with my fiance now, and it's a cool atmosphere here. But sometimes I remember about some nights in this yellow house, ghost or not. There is something that haunts me now, in my memories. As a kid, I remember being home alone one day while watching TV on the couch in my living room. It was of course daylight outside, and the light in that room was on. I was sitting on the end section where you rest your arm on the couch. So while I was sitting there watching whatever was on TV, I for some reason looked to my left to find a girl standing there. Heck, I couldn't even tell if she was young or a teenager because of how tall she looked, to the point that her head looked like it almost touched the ceiling fan. And the way she looked made her look like the girl from The Ring or The Grudge because her hair covered her face. Her clothes looked like she was wearing modern day clothing, like a tank top and underwear, so I'm guessing she was wearing pajamas. The presence she gave off made me feel uncomfortable and scared because all she did was stand there and stare at me, not moving. This scared me so bad that I had to look away for a second, then back to find her gone as if she vanished into thin air. I never knew what to make of this encounter. What do you think?